everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today with a Friday Reads video. Now this Friday Reads is going to be kind of an extended version Friday Reads because I have not done like a check-in or currently reading or wrap-up or any kind of video for the entire month of December because it has been an extremely slow reading month for me. To this point, today, it is December 20, well, I'm filming this on Thursday, but it's going to post on Friday, so it's December 26th right now. And I've only finished 5 books for the whole month, and 2 of those I finished within the last pretty much 24 hours. So yeah, it's been slow. But I'm going to briefly let you know what books I've completed and what I thought of them, and then talk about what I plan to read over the weekend. So the first thing I finished in the month of December was A Day in Summer by J.L. Carr. You've heard Sean, the Book Maniac, talk about this over on his channel. We buddy read this starting at the beginning of the month. We both disliked it. This is a story of a man who, this isn't like after the war, after World War II, I think, or it might have been after World War I. I can't even remember. After one of the wars. His son is killed by a hit-and-run driver, and then this man goes off to this small village to enact revenge on the man who hit and killed his son. And when he goes, like one day in this country village while this man is trying to extract revenge, and he encounters all these people, including some people that he knew during the war. Every single person in this book is unlikable. Not that I need my characters to be likable, but they are just miserable. The whole book is misery, and all of the women are written as if they're either sluts or bitches or both, and I just disliked it intensely. Please go read A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, which is a brilliant book, which I love. The second book I finished is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This is the book I picked up for my Gone with the Book choice for the end of November. Gone with the Book was the reading challenge that Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventure set up, where you were supposed to read a book at the last week of September, October, and November, a different book written during the period of 1900 to 1950. And for November, I chose this one, which is like 1921, I believe this one was written, or 1920. And it is about a young man who is engaged to be married. He is in high society in New York, and so he gets engaged to this other high society young woman, and she's very bland and vanilla and very conventional, and he also falls in love with her cousin, who is bohemian and doesn't conform and is also married to somebody else. So it's basically their doomed romance, while he is trying to decide basically whether he should stay within the confines of his society or follow his heart and you know, try to seize happiness with the woman that he loves. I read The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton some years ago and really, really enjoyed that book. I did not find this book as engaging as that one. I thought, oh, what's his name? Newland Archer is just, he's so lacking in backbone and character to me. I did like Ellen Olenska, who is the bohemian woman who he falls in love with, the cousin. May is just like a blank sheet of paper. She has no real personality other than the fact that she's young and beautiful and rich and it meets all social conventions. So I found this book quite boring, to be honest, and not my favorite Edith Wharton by any means, but I did like The House of Mirth, so I would probably try another Edith Wharton at some point. I then finished Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. This is a YA historical fiction book that I buddy read with a bunch of folks. I talked about this book a bit in my reading vlog this month. I found it to be a good book in the end. It started off really slow for me. I listened to it on audiobook. There's a lot of characters, and the chapters are very, very short, and you switch perspectives quite frequently, and so I felt like it took like almost half the book before you really got engaged with the characters and really cared, at least for me, cared what was going on. But the thing that I did like about it was its setting, which is Spain under Franco during, like, after World War II up until, you know, the book actually goes right up until, I can't remember where it ends, but it's sort of in the 50s, 1950s. But it's during basically the authoritarian regime of Franco, which I didn't know anything about. So I really enjoyed learning about that time period. So for that, I really enjoyed the book. And like I said, after the second half, basically I became quite engaged with the characters. I really enjoyed it. But then the ending for me lacked believability. So I kind of took some points off at the end again for me. So for me, this was just an average read. I do have another Ruta Sepetys on the TBR, so I will be trying something else by her and hopefully getting along much better with it. I then finished Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is another buddy read of a chunker historical fiction. This is my first effort with Hilary Mantel. I'm sure everybody knows this book of hers. It's been a big prize winner. It is the story of Thomas Cromwell and his rise to power, basically during the reign of Henry VIII. This book is written in a very, it's very stylistic in that it is, we're reading from Cromwell's perspective, but we're not always in his head. Sometimes we're in his head, and sometimes we're kind of observing, you know, from on high. And so sometimes he's speaking directly, and sometimes he's just thinking things inside his head, and sometimes we're just sort of getting a big picture. And sometimes it's very hard to understand which one of those three perspectives we're dealing with. So it is hard to follow at times. I found this to be the most powerful when we were inside Cromwell's head and he was thinking about his own personal feelings and his personal relationships and the things that he cared about. I found those sections to be really strong. I found this to be the least strong when it's dealing with all the political machinations of all of the different advisors to King Henry VIII, all the different religious leaders from one side or the other, because of course this is all set during the time when King Henry is trying to put aside his wife Catherine so that he can marry Anne Boleyn, and in order to do that, basically he has to break with the Catholic Church. And so there's all this religious upheaval that's happening at the time where, you know, some of the population of England is very ardently Catholic and some of the population is very much not, and those two segments of the population in the form of these advisors to the king are sort of battling this out as to which direction power is going to flow in England. So that could get a little dense and a little hard to follow at times. I do not think this is a good book for people who don't know anything about Tudor England. I don't know much about Tudor England, but I've read a few other books that are set in this era, and so that's helped me sort of stay with this. And I do think Mantel's telling a great story. I think her perspective of Cromwell himself in this book is very fascinating, because in everything else that I've read that had to do with Cromwell, he's just, you know, sort of awful, right? He's a bad dude, and he certainly can be bad in this book too, but you also see the more human side of him in his relationships and his what's important to him and sort of how he got to where he is based on his origins. So I liked this. I thought this was a great read. It wasn't my favorite thing I've read all year, but I am very much looking forward to reading Bringing Up the Bodies next to see where this story goes after this point. And then the book that I finished this morning, my favorite book so far this month, this is The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. This is a nonfiction about the 1918 influenza epidemic that just spread across the world, whereas tens of millions of people died due to this epidemic that was basically made worse because of the fact we were in World War I, and so there was, you know, congregations of young men who were being drafted and sent to these army camps, and then they were all enclosed together, and so it sort of set this epidemic off because of everybody's close proximity to one another, and then the government's refusal to address what was happening honestly. Basically, the government used the media to lie to the people about what was happening. So in order to sort of keep morale up for World War One, but also in order to, they thought, not cause panic, but it in fact had the exact opposite impact. The other thing that this book addresses is sort of the history of medicine and medical education in the United States during this era and a little bit before, because up until pretty right before this happens, up until the late 1800s, you could go to so-called medical school in the United States, and you didn't even need to go to college first before you went to medical school, and nor would you ever treat patients or dissect a cadaver or have any really specific medical training whatsoever and graduate a doctor. So this book also talks about how that all changed, and the men who were responsible for revolutionizing medical education in this country also were the people who were instrumental in the research that allowed us to understand what was happening with the influenza epidemic. This book is amazing. You can see I've tabbed it throughout. I loved it. It was a nonfiction book that I didn't want to put down. If it hadn't been December and my life completely crazy busy, and I have in these other buddy reads that I felt responsible to keep up with my buddies, I would have sat down and read this book straight through. You can't very often say that you read a nonfiction that makes you want to stay up all night reading it, but this is definitely one of them. Highly, highly recommend. I will definitely be picking up another John Barry book to try. This book was fabulous. So that's what I've read since the last time I've checked in. I am focused on this weekend The Toss of Lemon by Padma Viswanathan. This is a buddy read that I am doing with Joe Smith, and it is a historical fiction set in India in the early 1900s, and this is a family saga. We start out at the beginning of the book following Sivakami, a young woman who's married at age 13, becomes a widow at age 18, and then her family into the future, her children, her grandchildren, all of the extended family around that, and then also the history of India at that time. Sivakami's family are Brahmin, they're in that caste, and so we see how that caste works in India. Through their eyes, we see the ruling of British, and the people in the country that want that to continue, and then the people in the country that want the British gone, and they want independent rule for India, and how that's playing out. A lot of this book is about how women are treated, because much of the perspective of the different pieces of the story are told from Sivakami's point of view, and then we don't get her daughter's point of view, but we get one of her granddaughter's point of view. The other major character in this book is Muchami, who's Sivakami's basically, he's her servant, but he's also basically the person she's closest to after her husband dies. He manages, he's her public face, because as a widow, she can't interact in public. She has to be, basically, she doesn't interact with anybody outside of her own family or in people in her own home. And so Muchami manages, their agricultural interests, their land holdings, and all of that for Sivakami until her son comes of age. And their relationship is really interesting and supportive and wonderful. The thing that I love about this book is how it's just so lovely. It's just so lovely. Terrible things happen. I mean, obviously, Sivakami becomes a widow at age 18. That is not fabulous, right? But this book isn't written to dwell in the misery, as Joe has so eloquently put it. This is a lovely family story where we're seeing the history of a country play out, and also the history of a family play out, and all of the many ways that that can manifest itself. It's just a warm, comfortable, cozy delight of a book. This is just a perfect book to read over the holidays because you just sink into it and just let it wrap you up in its warmth. And I'm so thankful that to be reading it this time of year. It's been just a delight. And then the other thing that I want to focus on this weekend is my backlog of the Atlantic magazine. I am behind probably 4 issues of this. I've read parts of these 2 issues, and then I have 3 other totally unread issues, ending with the one I just received in the mail, which is the January-February issue. So I would really like to sink into these Atlantic magazines and get myself caught up, at least so don't have such a backlog of them. And I also really want to get started on the Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming by David Wallace-Wells. This is a nonfiction about climate change, and it was my goal to have read this by the new year. So I've got a little bit of time to work on this one, so we'll see how that goes. So that's where I am with my reading. That's my Friday reads. I hope you are all doing well and have survived the holidays. We had a lovely holidays, but I am happy to have all the pomp and circumstance behind me and to be able to relax. I've got a few days off from work and hopefully get a lot of reading done. So I will talk to you all later.